Welcome to the Inspiration North podcast, inspiring stories from inspirational people and how they found their passion, their true north. I'm James Eves.
And I'm Michelle Minikin, and this is the Inspiration North podcast.
Today's episode, The Menstrual Cycle Holds All the Wisdom, with Dr. Becky Quicke. We talk about how becoming a psychologist always felt right, setting up a business to be the psychologist and mom she wanted to be, and becoming a free-range human.
Dr. Becky Quicke is passionate about sharing scientifically proven psychological skills to help other women let go of anxiety and have the self-belief to flourish and fly. She empowers women who experience anxiety during the menopause to slow down, let go of worries, and live with more joy and ease. Becky delivers online courses, workplace workshops, and a monthly membership to help women navigate their way through the psychological storms of perimenopause so they can step forward with more peace and confidence. She also supports a small number of women who want personalised one-to-one guidance through coaching and therapy.
Good morning to you, Becky. We are very much looking forward to chatting with you. How are you doing today?
I'm really good, thank you. I am genuinely really looking forward to this conversation. Yeah.
That's a good place to start, isn't it? It'd be a bit awkward if it wasn't. So shall we get started with our first question? When you were little, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I think that possibly I did, although I didn't know what that was. So I grew up in a small town in Cumbria called Kirkby Lonsdale, and so it was quite a kind of I felt like I was kind of wrapped up in cotton wool in a way in there. So I never knew I literally never heard the word psychologist, didn't know what a psychologist was until I was about 18, although back then I don't think it was talked about that much. But when I was growing up, I was always curious about people's behaviour. So my dad is now retired, but he was a criminal barrister. And so even though I didn't know total ins and outs of all of his horrendous cases, I had a flavour, and I was surrounded by lawyers, barristers, and was always curious. I don't remember not being curious actually as to why were these people doing these things, and so that curiosity was there, and even to the extent that where I lived just outside the town actually, and just off the edge of a kind of a big I don't know how to describe it really, a park. It's called Underley Park, and there was a school there. We'd now call it an EBD school, emotional behavioural difficulty school, but yeah, there were young people who were living there, kids my age living there, who were in care. I mean, I didn't know the kind of ins and outs, but I knew that they were living there and they weren't living with their parents. And they were my mates, and I got on really well with them, and I was kind of curious to this other world and other kind of outside, I guess, of Kirkby Lonsdale. So I was always curious about behaviour. And then it did get to the point, I guess, into getting into my teens where I was wondering, where my direction was going, and didn't really know. But my beautiful, grandma, she said to me, my mum's Australian, so she was over from Australia for a while. And I remember her saying to me, well, I think that you'd be interested in anthropology. And I was like, and obviously that word meant no sense, but she described it to me. And yes, so I was also very interested in cultures. So I always, from a very young age, had the National Geographic, and yeah, I was interested in, anthropology was actually spot on. So that was what I planned to do. I remember even looking at a degree up in Edinburgh, the anthropology degree. And then my dad said to me that doing an anthropology degree would probably mean I'd end up working in a museum, which is probably true. And of course, as a 16, 17-year-old, that didn't appeal. Now it does. I'd quite like that. But that kind of put me off. I don't know whether I don't have the sense that he was trying to put me off, but possibly he was. I'm not sure. So I was a bit unsure about that then. I also did flirt with the idea of being a lawyer. I mean, both my sisters are now, actually. But I'm the youngest and I wanted to do something different. But I did flirt with the idea. And my family have always said that I would have made a good barrister. I can argue black is white and white is black if I want to. But I actually went to a weekend in Newcastle at Northumbria for it was the law department. It was in the holidays. Obviously, there were no students there, but we kind of took over the residential and the residential buildings there. And it was a weekend to show sixth formers around law and the law degree. We went down to the courts at the quayside, etc., etc. Had a fabulous weekend. Knew that I didn't want to do law, but knew that I wanted to go to Newcastle. So I just felt like law. And at that point, my sister was studying law, and she was telling me about all the case, all the legal cases you have to learn. And it is a dull degree. She'd say it's really boring, but obviously the job potentially is not boring, but the degree is. And you have to know all that. And I just, again, 17-year-old, I'm not doing that. I'm not doing something that's boring. So I then was really unsure. I went into the careers office. I can actually remember this. So I must have been in upper sixth at that point, whatever year that is now. And saw this leaflet, and it said, psychology is the study of behaviour. I thought, boom, that's what I want to do. So then I just decided that I wanted to do psychology. However, I loved geography, but the human geography, it all makes sense really, human geography, anthropology, all those sorts of things. So I wondered about doing geography, but was advised to go for psychology. And if I didn't like that, I could maybe then swap to geography. But applied to Newcastle, University of Northumbria. I was going to Newcastle. So I did psychology at Northumbria, and absolutely, I nearly swore then. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear.
You can swear if you want to.
Okay, I bloody loved it. I really did. I remember that first year. I'd taken a year out and gone to Australia for a year. And so I came to my degree, a year after leaving school. And so started my degree and completely loved it. Yeah, all of it. And the tune. I loved Newcastle. I remember walking down. I'm not going to be able to remember the names of the streets now, but the main one going down to the quayside with all the beautiful buildings. It's just,
Grey
loved
Street.
it.
Okay.
Pardon?
Is it Grey Street?
Yeah, Grey Street. Yeah, with the yeah. Oh, loved it. So
Beautiful.
So in a way, I think I probably always was going to be, a psychologist, and it's always felt right as well. So there's never been a kind of a time where I've thought, I don't want to do this anymore. So I feel very lucky, actually. Quite lucky to have that route through.
It's a funny one, isn't it? All of that anthropology, sociology, psychology, human geography, how it all, it's kind of all different lenses looking at the same thing, really.
Yeah, it is. But I'm really glad that I went. So Northumbria was a site, a BSc. Newcastle was actually a BA, so it's an arts. But I didn't get into Newcastle, so I went to Northumbria. However, I'm really pleased about that, and it's a brilliant department actually. But also, it did suit me. I really enjoyed the science part, even though I hadn't done any sciences at A-level and didn't see myself actually as strong in the sciences at all at school, but actually really enjoyed the research and the scientific element of it. So it all worked out.
Yeah. So what was next? So clinical psychology, it's notoriously difficult to get on a course to do that. So what did you do?
Yeah, so during my degree, I think I thought that I wanted to work with children, and I initially wondered about education psychology. And I don't remember hearing this explicitly being said, although it might have been, but I don't remember it. But there was a definite feel and vibe that clinical psychology was really hard to get into, so I kind of just picked that up, and that you had to get really high grades. That message was just there. And so I was like, okay. So I underperformed at school, in high school anyway. That's a whole other thing. I've been thinking about this recently, actually, and how going through adolescence is not really the time that we should be having exams. No. And actually the educational system is a man-made thing. It's a system that's been created. And actually it should probably be elongated and maybe in our mid-20s. Anyway, that's another thing.
Oh, yeah, I talk about this all the time. It's like, literally, who decided that we should do like really important exams when, our bodies are going through all sorts of stuff? We're discovering boys or girls or drink, partying fun. It's like, and then they want us to study like chemistry. It's like bollocks to that. It's awful.
I know. And if, absolutely. And actually we do need to immerse ourselves in our own development, not switch off and get into our books. So I did underperform as it were, do you know what I mean? I probably have, underperformed, as it were, in A-levels. And then, as I say, really enjoyed my degree. And I remember getting the results back from, not first year, that they were all pretty good, but it didn't really count, I don't think. I remember the first set of second year results. They were really high. And I just loved my work, I loved it, blah, blah, blah. And they were like in their 70s. And I remember being astounded and just thinking, but I'm just enjoying this. I wouldn't have said that then, I'm in my flow, but I was. And so then and this is really bad. This is not good, by the way. I don't think this process is good. It was fine for me, but in terms of a whole kind of culture, I then thought, maybe I can do clinical psychology, which, as I say, it makes me feel a bit, yucky. It shouldn't, but that was the message, really. And so I remember speaking to my sister had a friend who I think she was newly qualified when I was an undergrad. And so she said, have a chat with her. She's a clinical psychologist, and have a chat with her. So funny how these things just markers in our history. And she said to me on this phone call, she said, if you 100%, not 99, 100% want to do clinical psychology, this is what she said, then you will do it. But if it's less than 100%, you won't. And by that, she was meaning you go anywhere and everywhere for an assistant. You literally do whatever it takes. And I was like, right, okay. Quite intrigued by that. I did lots of voluntary work while I was doing my undergrad and all different departments up in there when you could just be a volunteer without any issue. Very lucky in that way, actually. People struggle now. And so left university and thought, well, I do want to go down that route, and literally applied for assistance posts. I had interviews from up in top of Scotland down to Hampshire, and London, everywhere, lots and lots of different places. And got my first assistance post in Manchester. So it felt like that was meant to happen. That was great. I'm from Cumbria, so I'm from the northwest. So it was nice actually to get that job there. And then kind of just did that job, which was wonderful. Then went to another one and then applied for the course. And I got on. I was about to say I was lucky enough to get on, but obviously it isn't completely luck, although I think, again, this is not great. I'm quite interested in the process now of trainees getting onto training, but I knew what they needed from me. And so I gave that, whether or not that was, I don't know. I just I could sort of work out. I just thought if I was interviewing, I'd want to do this and this. So I got on and did my degree in Manchester, my doctorate in Manchester.
I get that all the time from people contacting me randomly on LinkedIn. So how to be a clinical psychologist? I'm like,
yeah,
it is tricky. We were pretty much told there's not a chance in hell, any of us, because I did even worse than you probably in my early levels. And despite really wanting to go to Northumbria, I had to go to Sunderland. Got to Northumbria at the end, did my masters there. James was at Northumbria as well, but it is really, really competitive, which is just bonkers given the fact that we desperately need as many clinical psychologists as we can grow.
Yeah, it is. But there are other jobs that that can be done that are not a clinical psychologist. It's that's similar. That I think it's not the only route through. Do you know what I mean? Obviously, at that point, I didn't really know. I didn't know any other route. But yeah, no, it's not the be all and end all. To be honest. Did I really say that?
It's okay to say that.
I love it though. I do love it, but yeah, it's not. There are other ways, there's other journeys, definitely.
So there's you with your doctorate. Then what? What happened next?
Yeah, there's me with my doctorate. Just about with my sanity intact, but only just. So very difficult process to get through that. And I'm not sure if things have shifted, but it's it's a bit of a worry really, because in terms of going through clinical psychology training, we're not required to do our own therapy. It's the only kind of therapeutic training where we're not required. So psychotherapists go through their own psychotherapy and counsellors do, but we're not required to do that. And also it is a tricky doctorate, managing a PhD level research, an 80,000 word massive research project, and clinical work when you're still training, and exams, and oh gosh, it's but anyway, if you get through that,
get a therapist.
Yeah, you then need your own therapy. I got through that and specialised in working with looked after children. It was, through my training, I thought I wanted to work with children, and then towards the end, I decided it was specifically children who'd experienced early trauma. So I got my first. I'm just thinking. Oh, it just sounds like it all just fell into place, and it did. Anyway, we'll come on to that when I then pivoted. But I got my first job, newly qualified job in Manchester, and had a good few years there working in looked after children's services, and then a little stint in Staffordshire also working looked after children, then back up to Salford. And so I had quite a few different positions in that field. And then I got married and had my first, had Rosie, who's now 9. And then it's when I had Heidi that I was planning on going back to work, and cut a long story short, it wasn't going to work with just what I needed for a few months. I needed a bit of flexibility, just a little bit, not much. And that wasn't going to happen. And so I decided, I guess I always wondered if I might set up my own practice, because unfortunately it felt like that was the only way for me to be able to be the mum I wanted to be and the psychologist I wanted to be. Bit of a worry when you're working in child services. But it just wasn't flexible for me to, I know, when I say be the mum I want to be, I'm not talking about anything over and above, but basically, be able to take them to school and pick them up, and be more flexible in the hours and when I worked and all the rest of it. I decided to leave the NHS. So that was 2015. So yeah, it's nearly 6 years ago. It was the end of March, just about to hit 6 years. So yeah, I left the NHS, which is a huge, cutting those apron strings. A massive believer in the NHS. However, for probably a couple of years before I left, I just felt like things were really changing. It was when David Cameron was in, and there was a lot of support of kind of social enterprise, but basically setting up things outside of the NHS and things being commissioned differently. And it felt like it was crumbling a little bit. And so, yeah, I left, but it was purely a kind of family-based decision. And that probably so that's a huge initiation for me. So a kind of real ending of that phase and then beginning of a whole new developmental journey, really. I remember at that point looking up, someone told me about the term free-range human. And I really felt like that. I was like, I really feel free range. I could, felt free to set up my service in a way that I thought was going to be most helpful for the families. So I did exactly the same work I did in the NHS and children's services, but pretty much. Obviously, I wasn't working with the teams, but I did the same therapeutic work privately. But I did it how I wanted it to be. And by that, I just mean not just, let me take that word out. I mean environment. So I made sure that wherever I was seeing these families, because working with complex trauma, the structure of the environment, it needs to be safe for the therapist and the child and family to feel safe. And I was working in the NHS, in children's services, in venues that were not safe, psychologically or physically, sadly. And so even things like that, just making sure I was in an environment that felt right. And how I did the therapy was, or how, not the actual therapy, that's obviously the same, but the kind of processes around it. I was able to do what I thought was the best thing for them, really. So it went really well. I did really enjoy it, but obviously it's a huge step to start running your own business. And I don't think I actually saw it like that. I just was doing my job, but then, I had to send invoices and all this kind of stuff. I didn't really see it as actually me setting up my own business at that point.
No.
Shall I continue?
Yes, please.
We're building up to our meeting, my meeting with my phone call to you, Michelle, actually.
Yep.
So I kind of, did that, and obviously got little ones at home. And actually, so if I just pause there and reflect back to my career, doesn't it sound linear? It sounds very single track. And therein lies the problem, really. This is a society we live in, which promotes and encourages and celebrates productivity and very linear lines and kind of just going, really. And I was about to hit burnout. I'm not, whether I did or not, I didn't hit complete burnout. That is a significant issue. But I could see burnout. I was looking down the barrel of the gun, I felt like. But also other things were happening. So I mentioned my grandma early on, didn't I? I went over and spent a couple of weeks on my own. So I didn't go with my children or my husband at the time. I went on my own for 2 weeks. That was in April 2018. And I went and spent a couple of weeks with her because she was in her mid-90s and we knew she wouldn't be around for much longer. She's very, very special to me. So I went to Australia on my own for 2 weeks, which was just, oh God, it was amazing. I remember being on the plane and just thinking, I don't care, not having to worry about children sleeping and just being on my own for 2 weeks was a huge thing. And spending time with her because she knew me inside out. I'd say she probably knew me, the best, probably, out of everyone, really, interestingly. And so it was a real, a key phase in my development. And then came back And then I just knew through the summer, and my daughter was about to start school in September. So again, another initiation, another ending of the kind of little years and all the rest of it. And I just had this overwhelming knowing. How I often describe it is that my soul was whispering to me for probably a year before. However, I wasn't listening. And so it then shouted at me. And so when I dropped my daughter off, it was that day. So I literally dropped her off at school and walked to my therapy room and was like, boom, I have to do something different. It was overwhelming. So it's a bit of a shame in a way that I didn't listen to it earlier on, because I then kind of hit a bit of crisis of like, I've got to do different work. You know, it felt like I can't do this any longer. It felt like a bit of a crisis. So that's when I started stalking Wendy.
We all stalked Wendy. For our listeners, it's Wendy Kendall, and we did a podcast with her, but we'll...
And who is Wendy? For those who don't know Wendy, what does she do?
Who is Wendy, Becky?
She is an occupational psychologist, and she came into the group, I think this is how I got to know her. She came into the group for a psychologist working independently and started talking about, I guess, our practices in a different way. In fact, the first thing that she mentioned, I seem to remember, was this difference between business and practice. I was like, oh, that's interesting, you know. And so I kind of looked her up. I was intrigued by what she was saying. It felt very fresh, very different. There was something in it for me. And so I looked her up, and I was very curious. I just felt like, oh, she's got something for me. I didn't quite know what it was, but I knew I needed to change my practice, and I knew I needed someone alongside me to kind of guide me through that. However, it's a big kind of it's a big thing to decide to do that. Although actually, really, my soul had already decided that for me. So that's when I rang you. I don't know if you remember, Michelle, but Wendy said, why didn't you speak to Michelle? She's just been through the first round of the process and the mastermind. So we rang and you were like, yeah, you just need to do it, basically. I was like, okay. And
I should be on commission.
So I then pivoted my practice and started developing some projects that were aligning back in with some existing, older passions, really, back to my adolescence. Definitely back to my adolescence. So I was always very passionate around, all sorts of areas of justice. That's why I've worked with looked after children and still continue to, actually. So I'm very driven by justice. It's one of my key values. Always has been. Whenever in the approach that I use, acceptance and commitment therapy, there are, my values change sometimes in terms of my sort of top ones, but justice is always there. But, I mentioned the family that I grew up in and with lawyers, so justice is important. But I had this passion for women and supporting women. So I developed some projects, which was really nice to kind of play with different projects and ideas and work out where's my place to guide, how can I best support women who, of course, we're all wounded healers in terms of, therapists, psychologists. And so, of course, I don't think I've mentioned this. So even though my career seemed very linear and everything fell into place, underneath it was huge self-doubt and anxiety, but I wasn't connected to that. I was very avoidant, very, very avoidant, and just boom, boom, carry on sort of thing. But through that early process with Wendy, and probably before it as well, was aware that actually deep down there were these self-doubts and anxiety, and that stress was also contributing to me looking at burnout down the barrel of a gun. So I did my own work. Actually, that's right. I did my own work around my relationship with myself my career has been around family relationships, and I then used all of that theory. So it's very much been around attachment theory. And I used all that practice and that approach and that theory, as well as Acceptance Commitment Therapy ACT. I kind of was using it on myself. I sort of took time off, really. Started, didn't take any more referrals, spent a lot of time with myself, a lot of time walking in silence, just really getting to know myself. And went through that process and started to feel more secure with myself. And so then explored the process that I was using, and then started developing projects around that with women.
So obviously that was a really useful time spent on your own, in your thoughts, figuring out who am I, what are my values, what's next. So you've got some problems with women, so the justice within an area of women, some new projects. So it sounds like things are starting to unlock and unravel. So what came from all of that? That unraveling.
I did love that word. Thank you for saying that. So what then came from that was a complete chance. Well, no, not complete chance, I suppose. Nothing's ever complete chance, is it? The universe presented the book Wild Power by Red Skull. The book's called Wild Power. It came up on my Amazon. I was looking at books around women, but I wasn't looking into the menstrual cycle. But it came up, just literally popped up. No one had mentioned it to me. But I thought, I'm trying to think what it's the type. I mean, it's called Wild Power, something like unleashing or unlocking the power of your menstrual cycle or something like that. I thought, fancy a bit of that. That sounds amazing. So I got it. And that book literally changed my career and my life and everything. Because I then realized that deep down, I thought there was something wrong with me, because I have very different energies at different times. At that point, I had no idea whether it was cyclical or not, but I knew that sometimes I'm really sociable and love being very sociable, like a lot. So in the middle of things there. And then other times, absolutely have to be completely on my own and deeply introverted. And other things, but that's obviously quite, the extreme. And an A-level teacher did say to me when I was probably doing my levels, I was probably 17 or 18. And he did say to me, you're going to be diagnosed with bipolar when you're older.
Brilliant. Thanks for that.
Thanks. Yeah. Lovely.
What a knob.
Obviously, I didn't know what the heck it was.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was. Let's go away. Obviously, I didn't do that. Look at me going like that with my phone. For the listeners, I'm gesticulating like I'm looking this up on my iPhone. I didn't have anything, but I had to look that up. Awful. But you see, I was sometimes really kind of, giddy and happy and joyful. And then other times quite introverted and thoughtful. And some people might say low, but I wasn't. I was just very quiet. So, not that I ever then thought, I have got, he didn't say bipolar, obviously he said manic depression. I didn't think I did. I didn't carry that as a thing that I have. However, I always thought, and it's not just because of that, but generally, context of society and everything wasn't, it makes us think that we need to be the same all the time. And doesn't, and again, very linear and not cyclical. So I realized that I always thought there's something not quite right with me. And then I explored the menstrual cycle through this book. That's where it started anyway. And I thought, it's nothing wrong with me. I'm a female. I have a menstrual cycle. God,
which nobody tells you about.
Oh, dear Lord. So, and I guess some of us are more sensitive to it than others. And I'm very sensitive. I knew actually I was very sensitive to hormones. So through my pregnancies and afterwards, I knew that I was sensitive to hormones and saw that as a bad thing. Didn't think that was a good thing. I now think it's an amazing thing. It's tough and it's tricky, and we have to do some stuff around buffering ourselves. But I am very, very sensitive. but also sensitive in lots of different ways. I really pick up other people's energy and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I read that book and immersed myself in anything I could come across that Shani and Alexandra had written or spoken or done or anything like that. This is all kind of in my private life. And kind of came to realize that the work that they're doing around the menstrual cycle and menstrual cycle awareness and understanding these different phases, which they talk about this being different seasons, inner seasons, and started working with that myself, I realized that they flowed really nicely with some of the psychological skills that the approach that I'm trained in and use, that we know, because a huge body of research shows us that are certain skills that help to promote emotional well-being, basically. And I could see that actually, if you practice certain skills at certain times of the season and certain times of the cycle, it kind of gave them a supercharge. So it's not that, let's think about self-compassion, for example. Obviously, that's always great. It's never a bad thing. However, if you practice self-compassion and connect with your deep self during your bleed, so inner winter, menstruation, they call it inner winter, that just then leads to incredible renewal, and it does supercharge the connection with yourself. So, and then again, if you kind of track, if you kind of work with the cycle in your bleed, if you kind of really go with that energy and you go inwards, that's what you're kind of called to do. You're sort of, they talk about your inner lights go on and your outer lights are dimmed down, which is exactly how I feel. And if you can kind of go with that, then we can receive, it's going to sound a bit bonkers, but we can receive visions and ideas towards the end of our bleed. It's like, they talk about this in a book. I remember thinking, oh gosh, I don't, I can't imagine. But I've had incredible insight and real clarity as I come out of my bleed, and that kind of sows the seeds. That's why they call it like the inner spring, because it's then like, oh, this is what I need to focus on. And then, through your inner spring, you play with these ideas and you hold them closely and very tender with yourself. You nurture yourself as we do in spring with, in terms of nature, and then move towards summer. And that's when you can actually put all this stuff out there. And so, the archetypal energy is to be out there, with other people and doing your thing, and you can feel fabulous. And then you move around into the inner autumn, which is when we start turning back in towards ourselves. If you think about the harvest, it's a time to review the cycle, review how that's gone. And of course, that's then when the inner critic rises to the surface. But actually what happens is the veil is lifted, estrogen drops off, and actually become aware of what our critic might say about what you've done or not done in your cycle. And actually, I would say that's a time to, yes, practice psychological flexibility to decide whether the inner critic is helpful or not, but sometimes actually in its right place. So in your inner autumn, that's where it belongs. It doesn't belong in your inner spring when you've got these new ideas, which is when our inner critic can pop up. It's kind of letting go of the inner critic in the spring and going, I'll talk to you in the inner autumn. and then actually it can be really helpful, because it's like, oh yeah, no, that, whatever. And then I've just gone through the cycles there. But in terms of the psychological skills, we know that being aware of our values is so important, and that can come through, like I say, at the end of the inner winter and into the inner spring. We're primed to really get that and sort of review those. And then in summer, that's when you do the committed action in terms of that. So like, actually just do it. And then like I say, the psychological flexibility to be aware of what's going on internally and whether that's helpful or not comes through in your inner autumn. So that all went on. It just kind of was like, oh my God, the menstrual cycle holds all the wisdom. So yeah. I then thought I needed to bring that into my work. Shall I keep going?
Yes, please.
Which I did. And I thought that this is classic, you'll like this. I thought that I needed to really know this. This is a new edge for me. This is a growth area. And so I felt like I needed to be at some kind of level to be able to then bring it into my work. I don't really know what that level is, but some kind of sense of like, yeah, I kind of get this. And however, I don't know whether it was probably from the I don't know who will have said to me, but anyway, I remember in the autumn of 2019. Gosh, yeah, it's not been a long time. I looked into, I was obviously aware of the menstrual cycle and the impact on mental health. And like I've just described, if you can actually work with it and are in tune with it and put it, the energies of it in its place. My personal experience was it can really help for you to, in psychological well-being. But at the same time started to become aware of perimenopause and this, which I'd never heard of, but I heard about it and then I looked into it and it felt like I just opened up the doors into this world of lots of difficulties, basically, lots of issues. And personally as well, I experienced some physical changes. And I naturally just used my ACT with that and didn't kind of get sucked into. So if I'd heart palpitations, I used ACT and observed them and was kind of really curious. And I remember thinking, oh my word, I can see why you'd think you're having a heart attack. Your heart is absolutely racing. And it was just a very odd sensation actually, because there was a part of me that was like, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. But I wasn't in that part. I could see that part, but I wasn't in it. I was observing it, and other sensations, and thought, wow, I need to share ACT skills with women who are having these sensations. That was basically it. I just need to share these ACT skills because they're really helpful. It means you can actually carry on and enjoy your life without getting sucked into panic and anxiety. And so decided to focus on perimenopause and menopause. And that's when I became the menopause psychologist. And it's all gone boom since then. Yeah, it's gone well. I'm really enjoying it.
Yeah, and it's exciting because, you're going through that, journey, experience yourself as well. So it's not textbook. This is what might happen, and this is what you should do, and go and see your doctor and get some HRT, and stop it happening. Yeah, it's more kind of Wendy talks about that, you being the guide. Yeah, I like the thought of like Sherpa leadership. So you're there with them.
Well, I like that, Sherpa leadership. Yeah,
you can have it. Yeah. It wasn't mine. I stole it from somewhere else.
Yeah, no, it is like that. In terms of the psychological approach, that's obviously been around for a long time, and I've been working with that for a very long time. But bringing it into the context of our menstrual cycles and this midlife change, in terms of the perimenopause, that's a whole new thing. And I just think it works beautifully well, because there are changes taking place, both biological changes, but also spiritual and transformational. So this is one of the biggest initiations of life. And also I'm thinking about a woman, but there are going at the same time, there's a lot of similar initiations going on for men, I believe. Obviously, I don't personally experience that, but I'm hearing a lot about that. I'm quite fascinated about that, actually. But yeah, this is a massive transformational identity shift. It's tumultuous. It's just huge for a woman to be going from reproductive years to not reproductive years to our mature years and our second spring is massive, as it is adolescence, when you're going from being a little child to then being able to reproduce, boys and girls. And so it's a huge transformation, and there are biological changes. And the thing that sits right there in the triangle to kind of both of those is our response to that, and our conscious awareness of those. That's kind of the thing that makes things stuck and really tricky, or kind of flow through. And of course, there's then the whole context of us thinking that when something's tricky and difficult and hard, that's then bad, and we want to avoid that. Marketing obviously promotes us, humans, that we should be happy and in this constant state of happiness. But actually it's the tricky time. So I sort of see perimenopause as like, oh, this is the time of growth. This is where it's at. This is good stuff. We've got to go through this and pick up those nuggets of gold. I talk about the storms, the emotional and hormonal storms of perimenopause. But of course, when the waves crash and dissipate briefly, you pick up that gold, and then they come up again. So, I love supporting women and guiding women through this. It's a joy. It's not easy, but that's the whole thing. And actually, as humans, our natural state is not being relaxed and it all being okay. Our natural state is caution and anxiety. That's what we're born. That's how we survived as a species. But we just don't talk about that.
I love how you say that. Honestly, I'm so fed up with people. I've heard so many people say, oh, happiness is the natural state for humans. I'm like, well, all the happy people with all the happy genes got eaten by saber-toothed tigers. Yes. So the happy people were killed. They didn't get to reproduce because they were all so busy going, ooh, isn't that a nice tiger? But when the head's getting chopped off. So we are naturally true. Anxious and fearful because that's how we stay alive.
I remember, absolutely. I remember hearing someone saying we are basically predicting making machines. So that we are predictors, prediction makers. And so so I do like to kind of talk about that. And whenever I work with I've been saying this for years, it's not just about women in perimenopause and menopause, but generally, I've always been saying to all my clients that people do have a bias towards one nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system is that more, people talk about fight or flight, but it's basically when we're more aroused, as it were, our blood's pumping through our bodies and we're either driven or in a fear state, but it doesn't have to be an extreme, but we're more kind of biased towards that sympathetic nervous system, or we're more biased towards the parasympathetic nervous system, which is more the rest and the kind of calm. I'm biased towards the SNS, sympathetic nervous system, and everyone I work with is. And I always say, well, we're the ones who are going to be alive. We're going to be aware, and we're not going to get eaten by the tigers. However, if we, it's about understanding that process and understanding our nervous systems and our response to it. So actually we can remain within what we call the window of tolerance, where we're regulated, rather than obviously people who are working with me generally struggle and they become easily dysregulated. So yeah, there's a reason for it. There's a reason for everything.
Awesome.
Very interesting.
So we didn't stop you because it's so interesting, but we have been gone on a bit, but it's fine. Don't panic. We've had long podcasts. Is there anything else we need to put in, Becky?
No, I don't think so. That was it was nice to go through that process. Thank you.
It's good. I was like, this is so interesting.
I should be paying you for this, reflective process.
Yeah, it's funny. People say it's like therapy sometimes. So that has been absolutely wonderful, and I can't wait to be, finding out more about what you're up to, Becky. But we need to move on to the quick fire round. So we're going from really deep and interesting to really trivial. Brilliant. So James, do you want to take it away?
Question number 1. So when you were a teenager, who was on the posters on your bedroom walls?
Oh my God, I'm actually going to say this. Do you want to know the truth?
Yes, please.
Alan Shearer.
Oh, no.
I was a Blackburn Rovers fan. Oh, yeah, we had season ticket. I was obsessed with Blackburn Rovers.
Oh, that's hilarious.
I know.
Who did you have on your wall, James?
I'm a bit embarrassed about that.
No,
I don't know. It's probably like Drew Barrymore. That was usually a favourite.
Oh, yeah.
I did also have that picture of, the man with the baby. Surely you had that, Michelle. Do you remember?
I think
from
somebody at
Athena.
university had it, yeah.
From Athena, the man with the muscles and the baby.
Yeah.
I had that as well. Okay, that's...
Yeah, mine was just Robbie Williams. I don't like him at all now. It's really weird. Growing out of him. Okay, question number 2. It's a bedroom theme for some reason. This is just like totally randomly happened. What's on your bedside table?
Oh, gosh. Do you want to know my books?
Yeah.
Keeping the Love You Find, which is about imago therapy.
Mm-hmm.
The Smiling Man by Joseph Knox, crime thriller based in Manchester. Mysteries of the Dark Moon. Oh, amazing book. Maisie Hill's Perimenopause Power. Shaman by Yakov, Darling Khan. Moonology by Yasmin Boland and Wild Power.
There we go.
I need a photo.
Bible. Could you send us a photo? That sounds fascinating. We're like, ooh, all of these books.
It's an eclectic. Well, it's eclectic, although actually there's only one novel. That's a bit says a lot. Yeah, there we go.
Excellent. Find out everything. There we're asking these random questions.
And question number 3, what are you most grateful for?
I am most grateful. Well, I'm just going to say what comes into mind. I am most grateful for my daughters. Yeah, I really am. They kind of get me through. That sounds a bit sad and cheesy, but yeah, they bring me. Oh, I feel quite emotional saying that. They bring me so much. So yeah, I'm so grateful that I was blessed for them to be my daughters, Rosie and Heidi. Yeah.
Lovely. Okay, so this is a question we ask everybody, and I can't wait to hear your response to it. But if we could get in a time machine and take you back to your 18-year-old self, and we could sit and have a cup of tea or a glass of wine or a pint, whatever you're interested in at the age of 18.
Stay Bite and Black.
Yes, me too. Oh, disgusting. Right, we're sitting there with a snake bite and black with 18-year-old Becky. What advice would you give you?
I would say to her to trust yourself, because everything is within. It's all there. It's all within. I'd obviously want her to become aware of her menstrual cycle and work with the menstrual cycle. Back then, I mean, it just, I suppose probably Alexandra was just starting to be doing her work and being knocked back, and no one had been interested about 30 years ago. I know I'm not that old. So, but I would love her to be aware and working with her menstrual cycle. And that, I guess, would then show her that, to trust the unknown, trust yourself, and know that it's all within.
Powerful stuff.
It is. It's food for thought from a male perspective as well. So for our listeners, if you would like to follow Becky, the best place, go to Instagram and search for the Menopause Psychologist, and every other link is in the show notes. It's been really fascinating hearing about your journey and a subject that has opened my eyes to a number of things. So thank you very much for sharing that with us.
Cool. It's been awesome.
Thank you for being on. It's so nice to spend this time, share this space with you.
Thanks everyone for listening. Check out all the show notes at inspirationnorth.com. Join us again for the next episode, when we'll be chatting to another inspirational person. If you like this, subscribe and tell your friends. If you didn't like this, subscribe anyway and tell everybody.